I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Special Education. I've been interested in assessment and intervention for students with dyslexia specifically, and from culturally, linguistically diverse backgrounds. So I do a lot of work in India and also currently in New Mexico. So I look at dyslexia within the Indian context, and then I'm working on MLSS models, and I'll talk about that for today's presentation. So multi-layered system of supports was introduced in New Mexico around 2021, and it is an assessment and instruction model for both academics and behavior. The basic premise here is that all students in a class receive Tier 1 instruction, which is evidence-based core curriculum in reading, math. It could also be behavior. And then at Tier 2, a subset of students who are not responding are provided with small group intensive instruction. And finally, at Tier 3, a smaller subset of students who are not responding at Tier 2 are provided intensive, individualized instruction. So the way that the model is set up is if we are tracking students with really good instruction at the beginning, what should happen is there's only a few students who are not responding to that instruction, and then fewer students who might need intensive intervention, who might belong in that special ed group. So what it's doing essentially is if you have a model run with fidelity, you are getting rid of screeners and assessments and evaluations to identify for special ed because you're quite sure that the student who has not responded to Tier 1 and Tier 2 might need special ed services. But the assumptions from this model is that you have to have universal screening, that is screening all students, and then progress monitoring to make sure that they are making the gains that you laid out or you set out per a standard, like a Common Core standard. And you have professional development for teachers so that they know how to differentiate instruction for these students at these different tiers. And professional development for in-service special educators. So again, they know how to differentiate instruction at that Tier 3. So what was covered by NMPED before when they rolled this out in 2021 was universal screening, and they used a computer-based model for gathering data called the iStation, which measures reading and math progress in students. And then they also had professional development for teachers to talk to them about the theoretical construct of MLSS and how it should be implemented in schools, and what portion of it would be part of the general ed curriculum, and then what portion would be part of the special ed curriculum. They also did a very good job with professional development in Tier 1 reading to make sure that everybody received good evidence-based core curriculum. The research gap, however, was because it was rolled out around 2021. A lot of schools who were in the remote areas of the state, one, did not have access to this instruction or professional development. They did not have access to materials, to laptops. They had kids who were coming in after 2 years of the pandemic without any instruction. So there was a high level of learning loss, and they were starting at that disadvantage without having access to any instruction for about 2 years at that point, just because they couldn't access it. So what teachers were concerned about, especially in those remote parts of New Mexico, were how do we work with these specific population of students that we have? And how do we address the individual needs of teachers, serving those students from those culturally, linguistically diverse student populations? Professional development to differentiate instruction at those tier 2 and tier 3 levels, because they had a lot going on for tier 1, but they really did not know. So how do we make that decision to qualify somebody to tier 2? How do we make the decision to qualify them to tier 3? And what services or what instruction, how do we change that instruction to meet their needs? And what do we do with that data? So they were collecting data monthly from this iStation computer-based assessment, but they didn't know how to use that for instructional planning. And some of them didn't have professional development in tier 1 math and behavior curricula. So those are things we were interested in addressing. So we're trying to bridge that gap between PED expectations and what was on the field, what was happening in terms of teacher knowledge, practice, access to resources. We currently serve about 3 school sites. 2 of them are rural in Chama and Espanola. And one is a charter school in Albuquerque that serves Native American students. And their school population is about 98% Native American students, representing about 60 tribes. What we offer is evidence-based practice in reading. That's what I specialize in. And I brought my colleague on, Alison Nanneman, and she works specifically on math, or she's the expert on math. And then I have a doc student who just started this semester, last semester, and she offers behavior models. So it's that same tiered system of instruction, but it is for both academics and for behavior. So that's what she offers. So what we've done, what we've been able to establish so far, at Chama, we worked for 1 year from the fall of 21 to spring 22. We offered teachers bi-weekly professional development in reading in tier 1. We offered them a fidelity checklist where they kept a log of their instruction and how students mastered those skills. They reflected on it and came up with next steps. We also came up with pacing guides because they said they had standards, Common Core standards that they had to follow, but they did not know what to focus on. And they also did not know how to break it down by week and in terms of like what you would cover per week to hit all of those goals. And so we came up with a document that we call pacing guides to say, by the end of this week, you'll cover 2 standards. And that really helped them as well. And finally, we had biweekly professional learning communities. And this just was all them in terms of what they wanted. And we then went in and came up with free resources that were available, other progress monitoring sources if they wanted, and spoke about those decisions, like how are we coming up with those decisions as a school to move to the next tier and the third tier. And we also offered them professional development in math. They got access to a curriculum called Zern. And again, we did the same thing in terms of fidelity checks and pacing guides and PLCs. Then we moved on to Espanola. And what we found at Espanola was that the principal and the teachers were telling us that instead of academics, so we started with academics the first semester we were there, and then we were told that instead of academics, they would prefer to focus on behavior, just because they have a lot of behavior management issues in school. And if the kids, if they cannot get classroom management under control, then they really cannot learn, right? They cannot have any academics moving forward. So that's when we made the switch towards behavior. So the first semester, we had very similar to what we offered at Chama in terms of professional learning communities for reading. But then we switched to behavior and individual behavior modification plans as of last semester, and biweekly PLCs. We also work with the principal to implement PACS, which is a system that they use for behavior as a school-wide Tier 1 system. And as of this semester, my doc student has been working with teachers individually. So she observes their classrooms, she meets with them on a one-on-one basis and comes up with a plan for specific students in their classroom. And finally at NACA, we started with PLCs again, professional learning communities, and we did some in reading and math. And what we have really moved on to this year, which has been exciting for us, is developing an oral language screener and dyslexia screener specifically for Native American students. So what that means is we are going to have kids take cameras around their communities, and we are going to collect stimuli, the assessment stimuli that we use to test kids based on the pictures that they bring in. So we are excited about this because we don't have any other screener specifically for Native American students that are out there. So that's where we are headed this year with NACA. So the Special Education Neal Faculty Research Award that we received, me and my research team did in 21-22, provided the seed money to start a lot of this work. We were able to recruit one rural school for this 21-22 academic year, and served about 7 elementary school teachers from K through 6, 2 special educators, and 105 students. Sorry, I'm just going to move this here. And this led to recruiting two more school sites during the 22-23 and 23-24 academic years, serving 2 principals, 14 elementary school teachers, 4 special educators, and 220 students currently. And we've gone back to these schools, so they've created some long-term partnerships, which have been really helpful for us and the school. And these are some publications that came out. There's a lot of words on this. There are lots of text on here, but what I wanted to show predominantly there were 3 different publications that we got just from that data from CHAMA. We still haven't, we're working on the analysis for Espinola and NACA this year, so we're not there yet. But what we found just with the people that we did do, we just met them consistently for every, bi-weekly, and we made sure that the questions were coming from the teachers and we addressed things that they brought to the table rather than us going in as researchers and telling them what to do, right? But just having that community partnership helped with, like, the first paper just talks about how they were all in the elementary grades at about the 44th percentile for reading, which just means they are below the grade level standard. The grade level standard would be about 50th percentile. And then they reached grade level standard just within that 1 year. They moved to about 54th percentile. And then the other thing we was that if they had a reading difficulty, they were being misidentified as having a disability when they did not really have a disability. So we had a reduction of 57% of students across all grade levels who did not actually qualify for a disability. And the second paper here, something that they were interested in too was just, how is this computer-based assessment helping these kids, and how is it better or different or the same from a paper pencil test? And the reason why they were interested in that was because in kindergarten, a lot of kids, like I said, had not used computers, and then they were really struggling with, by the time they hear the letter sound and then they figure out how to use the mouse and then click on the right letter sound, it moves to the next screen. So they were getting a 0% in their literacy. And the teacher said, yeah, that's absolutely not possible. It's not representative of what they know. So then we did this study where we looked at, we collected data with a paper pencil test and a computer-based test. And we definitely found that it was a preferred tool. The paper pencil test was a preferred tool for students in kindergarten. But later on, in the later grades, there was not much of a difference between using a paper pencil tool or a computer-based test. But for that school specifically, I think starting off with a paper pencil test in K through 1, before they got into computer-based testing would be helpful. And finally, the last paper here is a practitioner paper for anyone trying to implement this RTI or MLSS framework. It's the same framework. There's just this tiered model of instruction. It's for practitioners to learn about developing and implementing this model in schools, especially rural schools and schools in New Mexico. And focusing on what is different about New Mexico and our diverse populations. And finally, the significance, right? What has really come out of this project is we are the poorest state, one of the poorest states in the US. Our fourth graders are reading, like about 54% of them are reading at the basic level. We don't have many people reading at the proficient level as yet. And 25% at this proficient level, compared to the national average of 65% and 34%, right? So this is in Albuquerque. That's the only statistic we have. But it's even more alarming in schools where we're serving culturally, linguistically diverse populations. So at this school site in Chama, 40% of fourth graders were reading at a basic reading level and 20% at a proficient level. The school at Naka, the current statistic as of last week for the beginning of year assessment was that 47% of students were below the 20th percentile. So they're reading at a very, very low level. So we are trying to turn it around. So one of the things I came up with was to add instructional intervention time instead of instructional time, right? Because intervention time would then target 50 to 70% of the class because that's where they are at right now. So it's about turning these schools from where they are and providing them with support that they need and that they initiate in building those long-term community partnerships. And finally, we are directly addressing the Yahtzee Martinez versus State of New Mexico lawsuit, which established that the state had failed to provide New Mexico students a sufficient education, particularly for students from low-income families, Native Americans, English learners, and students with disabilities. Thank you.